This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Natalie Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. A first in 9 years. South Korea's birth rate is up, driven by a post-pandemic marriage boom. Now, Hong Kong tightens the belt to tackle its deficit. Public spending cuts include the axing of 10,000 government jobs and a pay freeze for civil servants. Now, China slams Taiwan for manipulating the facts about severed undersea cables after Taipei blamed Beijing for the disruption. And China are also accusing Taiwan of giving away the island's semiconductor industry to the U.S. to gain support for its independence. Also in East Asia tonight, can China get its people to spend more? Authorities have been trying to do so since last September. We find out just what's holding Chinese consumers back. Plus, Japan's ambitious Star Trek. Its aerospace chief tells us how the country wants to double its space sector in the coming years. South Korea's birth rate rose for the first time in nearly a decade amid an ongoing demographic crisis. Now, the increase last year halts a downward trend that started in 2014.
그리고 코로나로 인한 혼인이 지연되고 있던 부분이 많이 증가되고 있었고 그 증가 추세가 이어지고 있습니다. 그리고 출산에 대한 이제 그 가치관의 변화인데요.
And for more, CNA's Lim Yun-suk, she joins us live from Seoul. First up, Yun-suk, this preliminary data from Statistics Korea, just how significant is it?
Well, telling, I guess the fact that it has turned around is significant because it was always going downward, since 2014. But now the fertility rate last year was 0.75, higher than the 0.72 recorded in 2023. And that was the lowest in the world. Now, the three reasons given in that briefing was because there was this demographic shift where the country has seen a significant increase in the number of people in their early 30s, and also more people getting married as many have put them off due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And also the third reason was given that there seems to be this change in perception in South Korea these days about childbirth, because for years and decades, we've seen the South Korean government put in billions of dollars into efforts to try and get women to have more children, and it didn't really pay off. But recently, many experts have been saying that the government policies have been more active and it's been trying to come up with policies to help with this work-family balance, childcare, and housing, and also getting, companies to do their part. In fact, there's this one company called Buyong, which has been handing out about 100 million won, about $70,000 to its employees as a bonus every time they have a new baby. And so experts are saying that that is what is needed to resolve this low birth rate here in South Korea, because if drastic measures are not taken, then South Korea is going to see its population shrink to about 36 million from the current 51 million. And, this is an aging society here, and despite the increase that we've seen in the fertility rate, there are about 120,000 more deaths in 2024 than birth. And that marked the fifth consecutive year that the population has shrunk naturally here in South Korea.
Well, it's good to know that these measures are, somewhat kicking in at this point. And you mentioned the data is significant. Does that then reflect public sentiment in terms of raising children in South Korea?
I think it's too early to say that. We will really have to wait and see. This is the first time we've seen it turn around because, in general, many Korean women are still very hesitant about giving birth because of the rising costs here of living, housing, and also especially the education fees to raise a child. But it is true that more companies are aware of this crisis here and more are willing to follow the government policy changes compared to before, like allowing more women to take maternity leave and then be able to come back to work. Because usually here in South Korea, many of the women here will be giving up their jobs to have babies. But still, still, despite this government efforts, I think a lot of women and a lot of people that I know are still reluctant to give birth, especially if they have jobs. And so I think there is this kind of discrimination against women for being pregnant. And then there's still lots of companies not enforcing the policies that the government have set. So we will have to wait and see. And I think it's too early to be, jumping up and joining anything. But, this is good news for South Korea, as it was, known to have the world's lowest birth rate. And this is an aging society, too.
And also a nice change from the political turmoil in your country right now. Thanks so very much, Lim Yun-suk there, reporting to us live from Seoul. In other news, Hong Kong has announced measures to cut public spending and boost revenue in the hope of tackling a burgeoning fiscal deficit. The city is set to mark its third consecutive financial year in the red after a sharp decline in revenue from land sales left a shortfall of more than 87 billion Hong Kong dollars, or about 11 billion US. Now that's nearly double the previous forecast. Now, Finance Chief Paul Chan laid out plans that include slashing 10,000 government jobs by 2027 and a salary freeze this year for civil servants. The job cuts will trim around 6% of the 170,000 strong civil service sector. Well, Mr. Chan says he plans to restore fiscal balance within the current term of government, which ends in June 2027. Right, for more, May Wong joins us live now from Hong Kong. May, tell us a little bit more the other measures that the finance chief announced to reverse Hong Kong's deficit.
Hong Kong has been trying to prop up its economy post-COVID pandemic, and it hasn't been easy. Last year, for example, Hong Kong only achieved 2.5%, barely touching its growth forecast. And also for this year, as expected, Paul Chan has lowered Hong Kong's growth forecast to between 2 and 3%. So going into this budget, Financial Secretary Paul Chan really had a lot on his mind, trying to strike a balance in the budget, but also trying to cut the government spending, because that is taking a whole chunk from the government coffers. Now, one way to cut the government spending, as you mentioned earlier, was to freeze the civil servants' pay, and also to eliminate some of the jobs. 10,000 civil service jobs will be eliminated. Yet another way that he's planning to cut the spending would be to take away and reduce some of the subsidies that were given out during the COVID-19 pandemic. On the other hand as well, aside from cutting spending, then we're talking about trying to boost the revenue for the government in order for the government to have more money in their pockets. And one way to up the revenue, well, the government has decided to, for example, roll out higher taxes for airport taxes, higher taxes for airport departures. And so that will help to perhaps add a little bit of money into the coffers. But remember here that all of these measures right now, a lot of the economists as well as the observers I spoke to, well, really doesn't really cut it, simply because it was just way too little. They felt that Paul Chan wasn't aggressive enough in terms of rolling out very bold measures. In fact, they felt that the people in Hong Kong needed to bite the bullet, and in order to make sure that things are going to accelerate. Here also, Paul Chan used tourism as a major factor, hoping to draw in more tourism using very distinct features for Hong Kong, such as perhaps banking on eco-tourism, banking on panda tourism, and also, listen to this, horse racing tourism. So all of these are ways and means to help generate more revenue for Hong Kong. But ultimately, we will have to see what exactly is going to play out, because it's going to take some time.
Right, so the analysts are saying the measures are way too little. What about public sentiment, though? I mean, what are some of the reactions to these measures?
Honestly, not many people were listening to it, but they have said they have tempered their expectations, because for weeks right now, many people have been talking about the possibilities of reducing certain subsidies, and they do understand that Hong Kong is not in great shape in terms of economy. Economy can be improved a lot better. So they are quite perhaps resigned to the fact that they're not seeing any sweetness being dished out, and they're hoping that Hong Kong will be able to weather the challenges ahead. We're talking about a lot of supply chain disruptions, a lot of trade tensions that will ultimately affect Hong Kong as well. So take a listen to what I said to them, or rather what they said to me earlier when I spoke to them.
Now is a hard time in all over the world, so we have to see how to be more stable situation now. So I guess is look forward to have a good future later on. Yeah.
The measures just to cut the expenses, just to cut the budget only. So it doesn't mean that you cut the budget and then you can boost the economy. It's two different scenarios, different purposes.
我可以接，即係其實今次好溫和、好 gentle 嘅，其實呢個 policy 因為我反而擔心佢即係咁多次嘅財赤可以維持幾耐，因為始終個儲備都係有限。
Cuts to government spending could definitely be much deeper in order to make a resounding kind of an impact. However, some of the analysts are also saying that, yes, this is as far as Paul Chan can go. But more importantly as well, they felt that he could have perhaps dialed back on some of the major infrastructure projects, because those are the ones that would really take up a lot of money. And unfortunately, the returns will be pretty much, long term. You're not going to be able to see immediate returns, and also you're not going to be sure about what type of returns you're getting. So I spoke to one particular economics professor, and this is what she had to say.
He is becoming more aggressive in expansionary projects like developing the metropolitan in the northern area of Hong Kong, try to make it a technological hub like the one in California, Silicon Valley, but it would be taking like 5 to 10 years at least, because for any NASDAQ companies, you can see that they will be burning a lot of money without even revenue, not to talk about profit, for a long time. And I think Hong Kong is at the stage of investing before we get return. So we would suffer more deficit in the coming few years.
Despite the criticisms that the measures aren't bold enough, but Paul Chan, Financial Secretary, believes that Hong Kong will be able to weather all the hiccups as well as challenges going forward.
All right, and that should include horse racing tourism. Well, thanks so very much. Mei Wong reporting to us live from Hong Kong. Right, for now, how markets are reacting to Hong Kong's budget. Here is Roland Lim standing by. Roland?
Thanks, Natalie. Hong Kong stocks rallying today as investors digest Financial Secretary Paul Chan's budget speech. The benchmark Hang Seng Index jumped more than 3%, arresting a two-day decline. And that's largely led by gains in technology stocks, after Mr. Chan proposed to allocate $1 billion Hong Kong dollars, that's about 128 million US, to set up an artificial intelligence research and development center. The Hang Seng Tech Index surging 4.5% today, and among the biggest winners are Meituan and JD.com, surging more than 10% at one point in trade. Moving on to the mainland markets, bargain hunting in Chinese tech stocks also helped boost the Shanghai Composite and the Shenzhen component by a 1% gain. And I'll have more business news in a little bit. Back to you, Otelli.
Well, thanks so very much for that. China has accused Taiwan of manipulating the facts regarding undersea cables getting cut in the Taiwan Strait. Taiwan has blamed China for the incident, and tensions are rising after the island's Coast Guard detained a China-linked cargo ship and its crew members yesterday. It's suspected that they sabotaged an undersea communications cable in the sensitive strait.
全球每年约发生100余起的海底光缆损坏事件，是常见的海上事故。民进党当局在基本事实、事故责任尚未理清的情况之下，刻意的渲染，企图政治操弄，不得人心。
Taipei says the detained ship Hong Tai 58 dropped its anchor near the subsea cable around the time of a report of a break in connections. The island has reported 5 cases of cable malfunctions this year alone. Taiwan, which Beijing claims as part of its territory, has repeatedly complained about China's so-called grey zone tactics to exert pressure on the island without appearing as an instance of direct confrontation. Meanwhile, Taiwan has dispatched forces after China announced what it calls live fire drills off the island's south without prior notification. Taipei says its forces will monitor, alert and respond appropriately. Taiwan says China deployed 32 aircraft to the drill zone, which Beijing has set up around 70 kilometers off the island's southwest coast. Taipei's defense ministry says the training is a, quote, blatant provocation to peace and stability. Taiwan also says the training might pose a danger to international flights and shipping. Time now for a short break, but coming up next on East Asia tonight. Ahead of the two sessions in Beijing, President Xi Jinping sends an important message to his top officials. And China accuses Taiwan of selling out its top chip makers to the U.S. in return for support for its independence. Hello again. It is now time for your business update with Roland Lim. Now, Roland, China's president giving his officials a pep talk just ahead of major meetings next week.
You did hear right. President Xi Jinping has urged officials to respond calmly to domestic and global challenges, signaling that Beijing will take a measured approach to the Trump administration's new trade and investment restrictions. Responding to a 2024 work report, Mr. Xi told top officials to enhance their political capabilities and promote the sustained recovery of the economy while maintaining social stability. U.S. President Trump has taken his most sweeping actions against China yet, and these include additional tariffs on some Chinese imports, restricting Chinese spending in U.S. strategic sectors like tech and energy, and pushing for fees on commercial ships made in China. The White House is also working on tougher semiconductor restrictions to curb Beijing's tech advancements. On the home front, China is battling a persistent property slump and sluggish internal demand. And here at East Asia Tonight, we'll be closely following China's two sessions gathering next week for signs of more robust policy support for the economy. Market watchers will also be eyeing the National People's Congress, or NPC, meeting. Earlier, Rajat Bhattacharya from Standard Chartered Wealth Solutions told us why he remains bullish on the Chinese tech sector.
The DeepSeek-led tech rally, and that is a big part of what we've seen, the outperformance of Chinese equities in recent weeks. Now, the other factor that is playing is, of course, the NPC. Now, NPC is the biggest one, I would say. And why? Because what investors are waiting for is whether China delivers the extra stimulus that the markets are waiting for. So we have had the stocks on and off over the last several months that China is going to increase stimulus to revive the economy, the property sector, and of course consumption growth. It needs to focus towards domestic consumption and reduces reliance on exports. Now, whether the stimulus delivers, so we are watching two things. One is the growth target, and I think they're going to set the 5% growth target once again. The other is how much of extra stimulus they put in, whether it's going to be 2 trillion, 3 trillion. That's the ballpark number that we're looking for, extra stimulus. In Asia, we have been bullish and in Hong Kong Technology Index, as I mentioned, and that has played very well over the last few months. We remain bullish on that, and this China stimulus that I talked about is going to play a crucial role in furthering, whether that furthers that or not. Within the region, we still like Indian equities because they have now come off quite a bit. And as you know, India's earnings growth, economic growth was still solid, but its valuations were very high last year going into this correction. So now we have seen that correction take place. Valuations have come off to almost 10-year averages, and the growth is still there. So we like to nibble. We like to use this dip in Indian equities as well to balance off the flows that are going into China.
Now, China has accused Taiwan of seeking to give away the island's semiconductor industry to the U.S. as a, quote, souvenir in return for political support from Washington. The Beijing says the ruling Democratic Progressive Party is selling out Taiwan's semiconductor industry and powerful companies, relying on foreign countries to seek independence. Beijing also claims that people in Taiwan are concerned that the U.S. could take over Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, or TSMC. U.S. media have reported that the world's largest contract chipmaker has been in talks for a stake in America's Intel. Neither TSMC nor Intel has confirmed the reports. Taiwan's government has also said it has not received information about any overseas investment application from TSMC. U.S. President Trump has accused Taiwan of stealing America's semiconductor business and wants the industry to manufacture more in the U.S. But Taiwan's dominance in the industry and importance in the global supply chain is strategic and has been described as a so-called silicon shield against an invasion by China. According to a recent poll, more than 80% of Taiwanese oppose transferring TSMC's advanced technology to the U.S. A Chinese online retail giant, Alibaba, has officially made its video and image generating artificial intelligence model publicly available in a move that's widely seen as deepening competition within China's nascent AI industry. Now, Alibaba has released 4 variants of its Wan 2.1 model, capable of generating images and videos from text and image input. It includes one version that is able to analyze 14 billion parameters, indicating that it can process far more input to yield more accurate results. Now, Alibaba also plans to make its reasoning model, that's QWQ Max, open source, following Tuesday's preview. It announced plans this week to invest at least $52 billion over the next 3 years to bolster cloud computing and AI infrastructure. The announcement follows a similar action from Chinese startup DeepSeek, whose low-cost open-source models created a frenzy among investors last month. Now, DeepSeek has reopened access to its core programming interface after a nearly 3-week suspension due to capacity shortages. Its services have been overwhelmed with demand since unveiling an AI chatbot that it says can rival OpenAI's ChatGPT. Shares of Budweiser Asia Pacific rallied more than 10% in Hong Kong after the brewer announced a leadership change to boost earnings dragged down by a weak Chinese market. A 29-year veteran, Cheng Yang-chun, has been named the new CEO from April. He succeeds Jan Krabs, who is stepping down after 7 years. Now, the firm posted a net loss of $16 million last quarter, missing estimates by a wide margin. Budweiser APAC's yearly profit has dropped steadily in the last 4 years, from $950 million back in 2021 to $726 million last year. The firm says its top priority now is to reconnect with market share growth in China. And to do that, Budweiser Asia Pacific will shift resources from its super premium segment to the so-called sub-premium brands to adapt to current consumption trends in China. It'll also direct efforts to boost in-home consumption. Rival companies such as Carlsberg also had a tough year. The Danish brewer says that the Chinese beer market declined about 4% on year in 2024 due to weak consumer environment, as well as bad weather during the summer. And that'll do it for business. Oteli, back to you.
Thanks so very much for that, Roland. Time now for another break, but coming up on East Asia tonight, rising prices weighing on consumer sentiment in China. We look at why some Chinese feel shortchanged. And their consumer sentiment likely to be high on the agenda at China's top parliamentary meetings next week. Yue Su of the Economist Intelligence Unit will be joining us on the other side of this break. China slams Taiwan for manipulating facts about severed undersea cables after Taipei blamed Beijing for the disruption. A post-pandemic wedding boom in South Korea eases the country's demographic crisis, its birth rate rising for the first time in nearly a decade. And Hong Kong's finance chief lays out plans that include slashing thousands of government jobs and a civil servant salary freeze as the city seeks to tackle a burgeoning fiscal deficit. Over in mainland China, boosting domestic consumption is set to be one of the key topics of this year's Two Sessions, an annual gathering of the nation's political elite. Now, you may remember Chinese authorities introduced stimulus policies in September, but it appears that they have yet to achieve the boost that they intended. So what's holding Chinese consumers back? CNA's Tan Sihui follows a resident in Beijing to find out why she is keen on downgrading her spending.
I moved back to Beijing from New York City last year. I feel the city has changed. Even the country has changed. I just feel like the economy was not growing as fast. So personally, for myself, I became more conservative in my personal spending. At the same time, I don't want to downgrade my lifestyle. I still want to maintain my current lifestyle without spending too much. I want to be a smart consumer. That's why I accumulate those coupons. I was just looking for the best deals. So this is the restaurant's coupons or dining vouchers I've collected for dining out. And these ones, I just bought them this morning. There's a lot of competition, it's very competitive. So I need to be very fast in order to get the best restaurants, best deals. The different platforms offer different coupons. So the more I spend, the more I can save. So totally, I think it helped me save more than 10,000.
我有那个买一赠一券呢，就是我那个买一赠一券是不是点什么都可以？对，点什么都可以买一赠一。是的。嗯。
They call this a discount, like 小确幸，就是 even though it's help you save 10 yuan, 20 yuan, even a small amount of money, but the happiness is certain.
看一看呀。I used to do my luxury product shopping here almost every year. But since last year, I haven't purchased any designer's handbag. 这个包多少钱？这个是4400。So I used to buy my perfume and body lotion, hand cream here, and my skin care and makeup products here. But right now, I just wait for the annual sales to buy all of them. I think for annual sales, they have 20% discount. With the money I saved, I can put that in my saving account, in my investment account, stock market account. I become more future-oriented. 哇，这个打7折，很划算。
If Chinese government can give everybody like cash gifts, like other governments did during the pandemic, well, I think that will be a big gift. I will use the cash gift maybe to treat myself with a holiday trip.
要看这个。
I'm still optimistic towards the future. It just maybe it is a adjustment of the economy, so we need to hedge against the risk and weather through the uncertainties.
All right, for more, let's bring in Yue Su, principal economist at the Economist Intelligence Unit, and CNA's China correspondent Tan Sihui from Beijing. First to you, Sihui. So you followed that business professional, and she looks like the typical, high spender who's really tightening her belt, cutting back. How prevalent is this, and what kind of impact does this have on China's economy?
Well, let's first talk about affluent consumers. Now, surveys show that sales of personal luxury goods that fell by 20% last year. And those who still have the appetite for luxury goods, well, they're spending their money overseas. And so I followed that lady that you just saw. Her priority now is not on luxury goods. It's really about household savings. Savings is clearly very important to her. And we've seen that household deposits have increased by 6% in December last year. So household savings are increasing, but that doesn't seem to be translating to consumption spending. And so there are some various reasons for this, and they are looking at uncertainty in the future. As we've heard from the lady, she says she's becoming more future-oriented, so she's thinking more about retirement savings. And we also know that there's a lot of job insecurity currently here in China. We've seen many thousands of layoffs in the previous years. In 2022 and 2023, thousands were laid off at big tech companies. And the year after, in 2024, we saw another round of cuts by multinational tech companies. And the finance sector, it also has its own challenges amid a weak stock market and falling prices in the property sector. Well, that's leading to lesser accumulation of wealth and also more increase in the debt burden due to mortgages. And so this has led to an impact on retail sales. And even though overall retail sales growth has recovered over the last few years, we haven't seen it reaching pre-pandemic levels yet. And this would indirectly impact economic growth. And so these are some of the factors that are affecting consumption spending. But with that said, this is more keenly felt in top-tier cities like Beijing and Shanghai. We still see a healthy consumption level in third-tier and fourth-tier cities, such as Zhejiang City.
All right, I hear what you're saying, Sihui, but just before we continue with the rest of the interview, I just want to do a quick recap on some of the measures announced by China so far in terms of boosting consumption. In recent months, officials have expanded a consumer goods trade-in scheme to include more home and digital appliances. And they've also pledged to increase budget deficits this year, as well as adopt a moderately loose monetary policy going forward. Now, US Su, I just want to bring you in now. I was just talking about this trade-in scheme. How successful do you think it has been since it was launched last year? And why do you think the government is kind of reluctant to boost, the demand side of things, like giving cash handouts, for instance?
Sure. Thanks for the question. I think so far the trade-in scheme has been kind of very successful, given if you look at the volume trade, it definitely surged during the Chinese New Year period. However, we also wanted to caution that we didn't see price increase following the introduction of that scheme, even if we see that transaction or retail sales of electronic products increased by nearly 200% during the Chinese New Year. However, if you look at the CPI, the price level of that product, we didn't see an increase of price, which means that demand, which is the indication that demand remains relatively weak. So that's the response to the first question. And second question regarding distributing money or helicopter money to the household, I think there are two reasons. So the first reason is technical reasons, technology or infrastructure readiness. It's actually it's the bank account ownership of Chinese household are not 100%. So it really takes efforts for the central bank or the central government to distribute money, cash to the household, especially for the rural household. And that's the reason from the technology readiness perspective. And the other reason, I think Sihui already pointed out, now the propensity to save is actually very high. Even if the government gives household cash, it wouldn't immediately translate into retail sales or consumption. It, by large percentage point, a large probability will translate into precautionary saving, which is already very high. So I think that's summarized the two reasons why the central government are very reluctant to do helicopter money that has been tested successful in the United States after COVID opening up.
So a lot of people hoarding their cash, basically. Sihui, so it seems that the government has been quite keen on boosting supply instead of demand, such as through their new industries like silver industry or the EV sector. What's your observation on that?
Officials are looking to adapt to the shift in consumer patterns, so there are more calls and focus towards policies looking into structural shifts in consumption patterns. And also, they're looking at several factors like the silver economy. We've seen that China has a rapidly aging population, so there are a lot more goods and services targeted at older adults. And we've seen that there's a projection of about 30 trillion yuan by 2035 for the silver economy. That's up from the current 7 trillion yuan, and that will raise its share in the economy to roughly 10%. That's why there's a lot of focus on the silver economy. And we also know that consumers are becoming more eco-friendly. They are looking at more sustainable goods and services. And so they're looking at more renewable energy. They're looking at electric vehicles, organic food. We're also, beyond the supply side, we're also looking at the debut economy. There's a lot more priority by the government looking at debut economy, where brands and services, they're looking at different platforms to unveil their technology and their products, really to spur this excitement and generate some kind of purchasing growth. And that is why these are some of the factors that they're looking at when it comes to new growth drivers. But to Yue Su, I need to ask whether these new growth drivers, are they big enough to stimulate the economy, or does there need to be more interventions?
Yeah, I think to a certain extent, it's definitely going to be effective in terms of boosting employment and income. However, I think in terms of see a sustained recovery of consumption, more efforts needs to be done, and we haven't yet seen a positive spiral being formed. I think if you look at the overall employment by sectors, the new industry or the green industry or digital economy just account for a small share. However, I think it's construction activities and manufacturing and catering industry actually accounts for a large percentage, a large share of total employment. So if we couldn't see that those three sectors to have a really strong recovery, it's hard for me to see the overall income level or overall income growth to return to a really robust growth trend. So I would say that to a certain extent, the new economy could help, but more efforts needs to be done by the central government during the two sessions.
Yeah, which leads me to ask you, Yue Su, what then do you think some of these possible measures could be announced or expected from this year's two sessions to effectively boost the spending?
Yeah, I think some policy already happened. For example, I think right after the Chinese New Year, President Xi met a few private sector entrepreneurs and try to give more support to the private sector, because private sector is really important. It accounts for 70% of the job creation and nearly 90% of the new job creation. So stabilizing the private sector will definitely be the top priority of the Chinese government. That could be a measure. And second thing is I'm looking at how the enterprises will provide more social securities to the employees. For example, like the tech giants, including Meituan and Jingdong, already expressed their willingness to provide insurance to migration workers. That is something that could really contributes to a welfare and improvement of the average labor in this market. So that's definitely positive. And third thing I will be looking at will be how the country will be helping the youth to find a job, given we know that the employment rate among those youths are relatively low compared to historical periods of time. So how to boost youth employment and income will be a key policy that I will be looking at. And lastly, I think China just released its #1 document, which looking at rural reform, and there are certain mentions about how to improve the rural household income. And I'm going to look into. I think I'll be waiting for the two sessions to provide more details about the implementation of the #1 documents. So that summarizes the four things we'll be closely tracking for the two sessions.
Right, and just before I let you go, very quickly, I'm going to talk about the property sector. That's long been a key driver of wealth in China. But now with all that downturn, to what extent do you think consumer caution, people afraid to spend, is linked to their falling home values and slower investment returns?
Yeah, I think it's very much relevant. I would say it's 60% relevant to the housing market's performance is more than 50% relevant to the performance of retail sales. So from two channels. One channel is directly related to the house appliances and housing furniture consumptions, which is part of the retail sales. So if no transaction in the property sector, then no need for new house appliances and furniture. And second channel is through wealth effect. If we couldn't see the price stabilize for the Chinese housing market, then I think the negative wealth effect will continue to be a dragging factor to consumption and consumer confidence. I think it will take another 6 months to really see the housing market bottom out throughout the whole country.
Right. It's been great talking to you. Thanks so very much for your insights. Yue Su, Principal Economist at the Economist Intelligence Unit, and, of course, our CNA's Tan Tzu-Hui in Beijing. Well, we're going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, full speed ahead for Japan's interstellar ambitions. Its aerospace chief tells us how the country plans to remain a star player in space. So Japan has ambitions to be a global leader in the rapidly growing space economy, backed by its strong history in space exploration and new initiatives in AI and IoT. Well, Asia's second, or rather number 2 economy, is a featured country at the Global Space Technology Convention and Exhibition in Singapore. Japan has been highlighting its innovation and sustainability leadership in this sector. Well, CNA's Julie Yu spoke to Dr. Hiroshi Yamakawa, president of JAXA, on the nation's extraterrestrial achievements and ambitions.
Our rocket is called H3 rocket, and we think that it's going to be Japan's flagship rocket in the near future for about 20 years. And we, not only JAXA, but also Japan, think that autonomous access to space is very important, vital for our sustainable activities in space. And so the consecutive successes of the H2 rocket within 4 times within 1 year, that's a really great achievement for us in order to for our sustainable activities in space. It also, business-wise, it's very important because right now we, JAXA, Space Agency, is in charge of the development of H3 rocket, but we would like to transfer the system to the private sector in the near future when we think that it's already developed. So the Mitsubishi Heavy Industry will be our private sector partner, and they already had contracts to provide the launch service using H3 rocket with several companies in the world. So I think it already shows the international competitiveness of the rocket. And talking about our lunar landing, which was realized last year, January last year, we think that it's really a milestone for us, and not only for us, but also for the world, because it realized a pinpoint landing on the surface of the moon. That for the first time. Until recently, the precision of the landing was several kilometers, but the JAXA Slim lunar lander achieved about 10 meters in terms of the precision, the difference between the target and the actual landing site. And from now on, I think the lunar exploration will be a sustainable exploration, not only one-time exploration. And in order to do that, very accurate pinpoint landing is vital for everybody. So we think that we will utilize that kind of technology for everyone.
Okay, I mean, Japan's space program certainly heading in a very exciting direction, yes. And it seems that the government is fully backing this endeavor. Let's talk about that $6.6 billion space strategy fund, 1 trillion yen. It's a lot of money. Yeah. Where do you see that money being utilized?
Yes, Japanese government is fully supporting us. Us means not only space agency, but the Japanese space industry and academia. And as you said, Japanese government provided 1 trillion yen for 10 years, about $6.6 billion US. And that is a great amount of money. And that will be, and JAXA will be responsible for the operation of the funding. That means we are managing the open calls for applications and also managing I would say, the selection of the proposals and those kind of things. So the fund will be fully distributed to the Japanese space industry and academia. And I think mainly 3 areas are covered. The first one is rockets, satellites, and exploration. So those 3 will cover almost everything related to space, and that will further strengthen the international competitiveness of the Japanese space industry.
Yeah, speaking of competition, the space race is intensifying globally. There are new players and existing players. They're increasing their space activities as well. Where do you see Japan stand in this very competitive landscape, and what are some of the core strengths that will give Japan the competitive edge? Yeah, the history of Japanese space development started about 70 years ago. And I think our strength is that we covers almost every areas related to space, including space transportation. I'm talking about rockets, satellites for navigation, telecommunications, and also Earth observation, but also including space science, earth science, and human space flight. So we think that we cover almost everything, and so we have our own ability for autonomous access space and also sustainable activities in space. I think that's the strength of Japan, and we will have to further strengthen that point. Okay, let's talk about the space sustainability part of it. Japan is very keen on taking the leadership there, particularly in space debris management technologies. I understand that Tokyo-based Astroscale and JAXA had just signed a contract for a mission. Could you talk about that collaboration and why this means so much for JAXA? Yeah. Well, space debris is a kind of remnant of satellites and rockets, and space debris or space junk is a headache for everybody who is trying to do something in space. So everybody thinks that we have to avoid a collision between space junks or space junk with our satellites, and we have to protect our own satellites. And so we are actually observing space debris, but JAXA and Japan think that we have to move forward more positively. That the meaning of that is that we have to actually remove space junks from space and refine the environment of space. And in order to do that, because there are lots of space debris in space, thousands and thousands of space debris, so one-time removal is not efficient. So we have to make it a sustainable business. That's why we are working from very initial phase with the private sector, and currently our partner is Astroscale.
It's time now for me to jet out of here. Thanks so much for watching East Asia tonight, this Wednesday. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia, and you can always look us up on Facebook and on YouTube. Thanks for watching.